falafel sandwich or to fix an old pair of shoes. Loud and colourful, you're looking at the bustling, historic Shuk Market right here in a town that's been important for just about 3,000 odd years, Jerusalem. And there are about as many things to choose there as there are in the political marketplace in Israel right now, in the fight to get control of the building just behind me here, the Knesset, Parliament, and the millions of voters who will be heading out to the polls in less than 48 hours and counting really have one thing to ask themselves: do we like this guy or not? The current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, they can choose to crown him as King Bibi, set to reign again and become the longest man ever in the job, or will they see the many corruption investigations against him and want to toss him out? Well, the latest and last numbers have Mr. Netanyahu running just behind in second place. But this is Israel, and it's not just about who wins, but who's the best at horse trading after to actually build a government. And as you join us for a special Connect the World, we are seeing part of that in these final hours, with Mr. Netanyahu turning to his own playbook and lurching to the right to try and grab some extra votes. Have a listen to this.
In my opinion, each block is an Israeli area and is under the Israeli control. We, the Israeli government, have responsibility over these areas. I won't move these blocks to the Palestinian Authority.
We are following reaction in the region from both Israelis and Palestinians. CNN's Oren Lieberman out and about at that market in Jerusalem. First, though, let's go to our Michael Holmes, who is in the West Bank, and you are in what is one of the largest settlements in the area. How are people on both sides of this divide responding to this latest salvo on annexation from the Prime Minister?
As you pointed out, Becky, it's Benjamin Netanyahu doing it again just hours out from an election. He did it last time by saying Palestinians were coming to vote in droves to sort of fire up his base. Give you a sense where I am and paint a bit of a picture for you. This is Ma'ale Adumim. It is, as you said, one of the biggest settlements in the West Bank. It became a settlement in 1977. Around 40,000 people live here now, and it has grown a lot since 1977. And that is partly what Palestinians complain about. They say that the way it is growing, geographically, it is being deliberately set up to be a blocker for Palestinians who want to come from the West Bank to Jerusalem. And so it's been controversial for that reason. And now, under any possible peace plan, were there to magically be one, this is one of the major settlement blocks that would almost certainly be incorporated into Israel, non-negotiable in many ways. The other ones could be Ariel and also Gush Etzion as well. Big settlements, thousands of people right up on the border there that would be incorporated into Israel. But that's not what Benjamin Netanyahu was talking about yesterday. He said all settlements, large and small. Becky, there are 130 or so of them dotted around the West Bank, and were Israel to suddenly annex them, call them part of Israel, that would pretty much spell the end to any sort of viable, contiguous Palestinian state going forward. You would have little cantons, little islands of Palestinian territory in that case, because of how the settlements are dotted right throughout the West Bank. As for people here, they're fine with it because they would be incorporated into Israel in any deal anyway. But it's all those other settlements. You made the point, and it's right. It is a lurch to the right. What Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to do in these last few hours, he's got to perform well head-to-head with Benny Gantz and his blue and white party, so that the president says, you won by enough to be able to go and form a government. You will have the coalition partners to get to that magical number of 61. What he's doing now is trying to pull votes from some of those right-wing parties, the smaller parties, to try to get their voters to vote for him to improve his head-to-head odds. Now, there's a risk in that, Becky, because there is a threshold in Israeli politics. If your party doesn't get 3.25% of the vote, you don't get any seats in the Knesset. The risk for Benjamin Netanyahu is that he pulls votes from those smaller parties, fine. He might pick up a couple of seats that they would have gotten, but if they don't get that 3.25%, they don't get any seats. And when it comes to coalition building, they're not going to be there to support him. So it's a bit of a gamble. It's perhaps predictable for Benjamin Netanyahu to do something like this so close to the election, but it is risky as well, Becky.
Let's talk about strategy in a moment. I want to get back to you. Let me first, though, get to Oren, who is in amongst, Oren, what I understand, are largely Netanyahu's supporters, or Likud supporters. What's the response there to his comments?
Well, this is very much a Likud stronghold, the Machne Yehuda market. In fact, there was another political party rallying just a short way away from us a short time ago, trying to drum up some support for a different party. And one of the sellers here simply yelled at him over and over again, Bibi, Bibi, Bibi. And that gives you the idea of where everybody here will be voting. This is where Netanyahu has strong, steadfast support. And we can get that just by talking to the people around us who, if we walk a little bit here, we'll take a step here. Shniya, bo. Lemmi ata matzbiya. Some here are a little shyer than others when it comes to who they're voting for, but I suspect the majority of those here will say it's Likud, it's Netanyahu. His comments, what they expect from him, his comments, just another reason to support Netanyahu. So that hasn't changed anything. If anything, it has strengthened Netanyahu's support where he already had it. There is supposed to be a Likud rally here with some of the politicians here, but that, in true Middle East style, appears to be running just a few minutes late here.
So, Oren, what's the strategy here?
For Netanyahu, those comments, and we expected it. We expected a sharp move to the right before the election. We saw it in 2015 with his comment on the eve of the election that there would be no Palestinian state under him. We're seeing it again with this comment that we will annex not only the settlement blocks, but also the isolated settlements. And Michael touched on this. It's the idea that if he doesn't have the biggest party, the president of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, who has a notoriously bad relationship with the prime minister, might allow Netanyahu's rival to put together a government. And it seems like Netanyahu is responding to that concern and trying to pull right-wing voters from other smaller right-wing parties. He'd been sensitive about that until now. He had let the other right-wing parties sort of have 4, 5, 6 seats. Now it seems like he's trying to pull those votes. The risk, of course, as Michael pointed out, is he puts them under the electoral threshold. He loses coalition partners unless he sucks up every single one of those votes, which doesn't seem to be likely. For Netanyahu, though, it looks like he now wants to have the biggest party on Tuesday, April 9th, in just a couple of days. That looks like the strategy here. There is a risk here, again, and it is that risk that he forces his coalition partners, his potential coalition partners, under that electoral threshold. In a sense, Netanyahu may shoot himself in the foot with the comment, but, of course, we'll see.
Michael, Jordan's foreign minister yesterday echoing the position by not just Palestinians, but by millions in the Arab and wider Muslim world. Israel must, and he said, withdraw from Arab lands occupied since 1967 and allow the creation of a Palestinian state. This is a red line and not a viable diplomatic move, according to millions of people. There is a suggestion that this could be just a ruse at this point, a ploy by Benjamin Netanyahu. Were he to build the biggest coalition and carry on as prime minister, there is, of course, the option for him never to come good on this statement or suggestion, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. He could do what he likes if he wins the election. Now, let's remember, too, this is a prime minister who's not really on the record as being a fan of a Palestinian state anyway. I mean, at the last election, he said there wouldn't be a Palestinian state on his watch, and certainly if he annexes all of the settlements, all 130 or so of them, there's not going to be a viable Palestinian state anyway. The interesting thing, we spent a bit of time with Benny Gantz and the Blue and White Party, which of course in the last polls on Friday was up just against Benjamin Netanyahu in the head-to-head. The Palestinians can't really take much comfort from his positions either. We asked him specifically about his position when it comes to the Palestinians. He said his position is Jerusalem is for Israel. Israel will maintain security control of the Jordan Valley. He said no going back to 67 borders, and he said there's no one to negotiate with on the Palestinian side. So if you are on the Palestinian side, that's not exactly heartening when that's coming from the other major power in this election. The other thing that is interesting in that is we spent time with the Arab parties, the Arab-Israeli parties, and the Palestinians, basically. And what they were telling us, too, is that they don't want to be in a coalition with either side, but they would likely support Benny Gantz and the blue and white in the Knesset. So they're not going to join a coalition. Gantz says he doesn't want Israeli Arab parties in his coalition. Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't either. But they are 17 to 20% of the electorate. They could conceivably win, if they turn out, 10 or 11 seats. That's a pretty decent block in the Knesset. Now, even if they're not in a coalition, if they go to the president, Rivlin, and say, we will support Mr. Gantz in the Knesset, that's a pretty reassuring thing for him when it comes to the power in the Knesset. So the other factor to remember in this too, many Palestinians are calling for a boycott of this election. They say, what's the point when you look at what's happened to us, what's likely to happen to us, what the positions of the major parties? Let's not vote. So you've got the sort of Israeli Arab politicians out there saying, yes, please vote. It does matter. Your vote does count. We get 8 to 11 seats. That is quite a weapon in the Knesset. And when it comes to what happens when the polls close on Tuesday and that horse trading begins, Becky.
Oren, his critics say that Benjamin Netanyahu has spent more time courting strong nationalistic leaders around the world in the run-up to this campaign in an effort to shore up support for isolating Iran than dealing with what they say is this existential threat, that is this Israeli-Palestinian issue. So many might say they are surprised that he's put this right back on the agenda, as it were, with just 48 hours to go. Could this all backfire on him?
Well, I don't think there's any risk that the Palestinian issue on the agenda will come back in a way that will hurt him. There isn't going to be somebody in Israeli politics, at least not a major player, who comes out and says, yes, there's going to be peace here shortly. So I don't expect him to hurt him in that sense. Netanyahu, in terms of the criticism that he courts these sort of strongman leaders, I don't think that's criticism he's afraid of in that sense. We saw it over the last few weeks. We saw Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meeting with President Donald Trump. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro was here. He just went to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. He has close relationship with these. That's one issue, his foreign policy. The other, as you pointed out, is Iran, and doing everything possible to combat Iran, especially in the lead up to this election.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in the fight of his political life. In his corner in the boxing ring of Israeli politics, he has the heavyweights. President Donald Trump has made it clear his choice is Netanyahu.
Should have taken place many decades ago.
U.S. recognition of Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights, a political gift between longtime friends. In the weeks before the election, Netanyahu has visited Trump in Washington and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Russia. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, the Trump of the tropics, also came to Jerusalem for the first time. The meetings, all part of Netanyahu's campaign strategy to show off his foreign policy achievements, while distracting from perhaps Netanyahu's biggest challenge, a series of corruption investigations he faces.
Fake news.
Netanyahu has borrowed a page from Trump's playbook, decrying the investigation as a media-fueled witch hunt, while proclaiming his innocence.
Maybe it's an honor to have you at the Oval Office. Thank you.
But while Trump's biggest concerns about the Mueller report never materialized, Netanyahu's have. The Attorney General has said he intends to indict Netanyahu on bribery and breach of trust charges in 3 separate cases. Any indictment won't come until after the elections, as Netanyahu seeks a 5th term in office. If he wins, if his big endorsements can beat out his looming indictments, it would make him Israel's longest-serving prime minister.
I had said this was a Likud stronghold, and of course I managed to find the one guy who was shy in the market. Let me make that point this time. למי אתה מצביע?
אני מצביע ליכוד.
He says he's voting Likud.
אבל אני מצביע ליכוד לא בגלל ביבי.
למה? He's not voting for Netanyahu, he's voting for the party.
עד שביבי לא ייתן לנו תשובות על מה שהוא עשה, או עד שאנחנו לא יודעים שבוודאות הוא לא עשה כלום, אנחנו נהיה ליכוד, אבל אנחנו לא נהיה ביבי.
Actually, an interesting answer. He said he will always vote Likud, but He doesn't want to specifically endorse Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu because he wants answers as to all the questions he's facing in the corruption investigations, but he is steadfast Likud. This, as I said before, is a Likud stronghold. Here, many will vote for Netanyahu, even if they don't support him individually.
Thank you, Oren.
Oren Lieberman in the market, and Michael on the West Bank for you, to both of you. Thank you. Well, let's get you a little look, see through these newspapers here. Israel's largest paper, Yediot, has Gantz on the left under chance of chance, and Netanyahu himself under keep the momentum. The Jerusalem Post, focusing on the news of the day and all that we've just been discussing. And lastly, Haaretz, the so-called thinking man's newspaper, avoiding the election, it may seem, but perhaps not quite, splashing all over that Bibi damaged the country by revealing intelligence information about Iran's nuclear ambitions. An awful lot to digest.